Good morning. Welcome to the fifth plenary of the 2023 Justice and Treatment Partnerships Conference. My name is Justice Barnes, and on behalf of the Association of Justice and Treatment Professionals, welcome. The Association of Justice and Treatment Professionals tries to provide a forum for subject matter experts to share their ideas and also persons with lived experiences share ideas to help us all learn and optimize successful outcomes in whatever sphere we are working in. And in so doing, we try to identify subject matter experts who have something to share with all of us. And however, in doing so, we may not necessarily accept all viewpoints or the viewpoints that are provided do not necessarily reflect the views of the Association of Justice and Treatment Professionals. However, there are viewpoints that are useful to include in the discussion of how we get better and how we improve. Today, we are fortunate to have some subject matter experts to assist us in that regard. And what I should indicate is that the biographies of all the subject matter experts can be found at www.justicetreatment.org. You could get additional information. As I said, my name is Justice Barnes. I'm the conference chair. And this conference has been brought to you by a planning committee that was made up of Brian Cooper, Aileen McGinty, Megan Oliver, Carol Sinclair, and also myself, Justice Barnes. And you can find the full biographies of all of these persons who have given up their time at www.justicetreatment.org. We invite you to participate in this process, and in so doing, we encourage you to send your questions to the chat. At the end of this presentation, at some point, so hopefully by a few days, the recorded version of this presentation will be available. Today's session is called Drug Treatment Court Program Evolution and Evaluation. Laura Day and Sarah Pichut are going to be the subject matter experts. And the person who is going to take us through today, the person who is going to guide us through today is Valerie Cochran. Valerie serves as the coordinator for the Newfoundland and Labrador Drug Treatment Court, a role in which she was seconded by the Department of Justice and Public Safety to develop and implement the pilot program in St. John's. Prior to her role with the Drug Treatment Court, she worked as NL Legal Aid Commission. She worked with the Newfoundland and Labrador Legal Aid Commission as a risk assessment officer with the Family Violence Intervention Court and as a federal prison liaison with the John Howard Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. So with that, I'll turn matters over to Valerie to take us through the day.
I'll say good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's good afternoon in Newfoundland. It's good morning for most everybody else. To start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We acknowledge the island of Newfoundland as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu and Inuit. We strive for respectful relationships with all the people of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation while we honor and protect this beautiful land together. So as Justice Barnes introduced, this session is the Drug Treatment Court Program, Evolution and Evaluation. And we have Laura Day and Sarah Pichut, experts from the Toronto Drug Treatment Court program, who will take us through how the TDTC has been working through an evolutionary process to redefine success. This process has produced both minor and significant changes in what experts consider to be a malleable, client-centered environment and culture. Laura has been a social worker at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health for 13 years. She has spent most of her career advocating for alternatives to incarceration for people with mental health and addictions in the Toronto Drug Treatment Court. Sarah has worked as a counselor and therapist at CAMH, the Center for Addictions and Mental Health, for nearly 2 decades in a variety of programs, and has been with the Toronto Drug Treatment Court for the past 4 years. As Justice Barnes said, any questions, please enter them in the question Q&A portion on the program, as I'll be monitoring them, and we'll present them to Sarah and Laura at the last 10 minutes or so of the program. So without further delay, I'll hand it over to Sarah and Laura, so we have lots of time for their presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Just going to set up my, there we go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited here to present about our program and the evolution and evaluation of it. So welcome. Just a quick note of our agenda. What we'll be doing today will be reviewing the basics of what the Toronto Drug Treatment Court is, and then we'll explain how we've evolved over the last 25 years and how we're redefining success through a new evaluation. So the Toronto Drug Treatment Court was the first therapeutic court in Canada, established in 1998, and we're located in downtown Toronto. We have a multidisciplinary restorative justice model, combining substance use treatment with addressing criminogenic needs and judicial supervision. And our goal is to be an alternative to incarceration and reducing recidivism. So who is eligible for our program? We serve adults who meet the criteria for substance use disorder, who have significant enough substance use concerns concerning specifically stimulants, crack or crystal meth mostly, or opiates, heroin or fentanyl. And they have to be charged in Toronto with a nonviolent criminal charge related to their substance use. So mostly we see non-commercial trafficking or possession for the purpose, non-residential break-and enters, theft, possession of stolen property, and then they have to also have a criminal history that's significant enough to suggest that they have a medium to high risk of recidivism. And our principles are that the treatment should match the risks. And so we target their needs with intensive case management and stabilization. And we create a program that matches various learning styles or abilities. We've created a program that is simple, structured. It focuses on frequent and brief interventions. So we have groups 3 days a week, and we build routines. So it's the same routine every week. And there's shorter interventions that allow people to come in and when they're able to and focus for a shorter period of time. It's also long-term. So our program is at least 12 months, but most of our participants take much longer in the program. And we are harm reduction focused. Although many of our clients come in with abstinence goals, we're also focused around safer or reduced use. And we help people move from a place of external motivation, goal of getting out of jail or staying out of jail, to more internal motivation. I want a different kind of life for myself. And we make a lot of special considerations as appropriate regarding their trauma, acquired brain injury, mental health concerns, or learning disabilities. And we've structured our program in a way that understands that lapses and relapse happen. And this is in regards to their substance use and also their criminal behavior. It's an iceberg. And so it's a metaphor for the complexity of our clients. So on the surface, the program was created under the principle that if you address someone's substance use, you will also reduce their criminal behavior. And that's the basic idea. But underneath that, it's a complex intervention, which is why we work with our clients for such a long period of time, is that they're using and they're committing crimes and they're going to jail, and we're trying to stop that. That's the top of the iceberg. But of course, it's much more complex, and there's more complex issues under that, including, as I've mentioned, brain injury, homelessness, language, learning, mental health, other social determinants of health that go along with that. We're set up to be a collaborative program. So our designated treatment provider is us here at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is the largest mental health and addictions hospital in the country. Our team is very small component of that. So we're a team of mostly social workers with a court liaison, a peer support worker, who herself is a graduate of our program, a registered nurse, and a housing worker. We have a judge, a team of judges, and we have Crown attorneys who are federal and provincial, and they have agreements so that they have carriage over each other's matters, and they switch each month. We have defense counsel and dedicated duty counsel connected to our program, a paralegal, a probation officer, a dedicated police liaison who's a part of our team, court clerks, historically who've been consistent, and we have some struggle with that, but getting the same people in each time, and a court chaplain. So how do you get into drug treatment court? The first step is to be arrested, and the second step is to be referred. So applications have to be completed by a lawyer, and has to be a voluntary application. They're then screened by the Crown, and the Crown does a very thorough screening process. So they review all of the current charges and also all the criminal history of the individual who's applying to our program. And then once the Crown screens them eligible, our court liaison, which is me, I meet with them and do a brief assessment with them to assess that their substance use and mental health concerns are significant enough that would warrant a year-long intensive outpatient program. They then appear in court and they plead guilty, although they're not sentenced. And then they're released on a drug treatment court bail, which has a number of conditions: curfew, appearance requirements, some perhaps restrictions on where they can go. And then they enter into what's called the 30 to 60-day assessment period. So at this period, they have the opportunity to try out the program to see if it's a good fit for them and to see if they want to do the program. And anytime in that initial assessment period, they have the opportunity to strike their pleas and go back into the regular system. So they're released on their bail and they come into our program and they complete an assessment at CAMH, and then the program begins. Their court attendance is once weekly, but it varies depending on how they are where they are in the stage of the program. And the stage of the programs is sort of a flow chart of how people enter in through our program. It follows more or less the stages of change model, with the beginning as an assessment and orientation. So at this phase of the program, we're doing assessment, and it's a needs assessment. So we're trying to assess what are the immediate needs that this person has. Do they have their ID? Do they have housing? Do they have a family doctor? Do they need addiction medicine supports? Do they need income supports? Do they need transportation supports? In Toronto, it's expensive to even move through the city. It's $3 to just get anywhere on the transit system. So we offer supports around that as well. Then they move into our early recovery or preparation stage. At this point, we're still focusing on getting ID, support, scheduling, kind of basic grounding techniques for trauma, stabilizing on medication, psychoeducational goals, simple aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy, short-term goal setting. And eventually, our clients move into an intensive phase. And for the most part, we outsource this. We refer them to residential treatment programs in Toronto or elsewhere in Ontario, or they do a structured intensive outpatient program, depending on their needs and often their housing situation. And then once they successfully complete that, they move into our maintenance phase. And our maintenance phase focuses a bit more on criminal thinking, on individual goal setting, group therapy and individual therapy, and people's needs as they are and as they're moving through their program. And as people move further along in the program, they get to continuing care or graduation. At this point, we're looking towards getting someone connected to the community through volunteering, education, or working ideally. And we may be doing some higher level therapy with them, trauma, anger therapy, social integration. And then after they go complete the program, they're on probation. And we continue to work with people into what we call the phase 2 while they're on probation, and then beyond. We work with our clients for years. And so when they're finished with us, if they can keep coming back for as long as they want. We have a number of participants who come back just on Fridays when we have our gym group, and they play floor hockey, and then they check in. And it's just part of their routine to keep connected with us. I think I've highlighted a lot of these, but I do want to go over some, which is we do focus heavily on case management through system navigation, getting someone help. Housing is huge, family, life skills. Again, it varies a lot. We do individual counseling or therapy, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy. We're trauma informed. We focus on relapse prevention, group sessions 3 times a week. We're very harm reduction focused. So this is in terms of their immediate safety, reduction of substance use, or changing where or how they use their substance use. Or we focus a lot when someone is released from custody on making sure that they have naloxone or Narcan kits available to them, and that they're trained. We provide people this upon the release and training upon release. And throughout their participation in the program. And we focus a lot on harm reduction strategies, using with a friend, using with someone with a phone, making sure your phone is charged, making sure that people have access to emergency services when they're available, encouraging people to use the supervised injection sites throughout Toronto. We also do not sanction for use. I think this is a really important component of what we're doing here. So our participants are required to disclose and report all of their substance use in court and when they're in treatment at CAMH. But there is no sanction for substance use, and we really try to treat it as value neutral and focus on the participation in other ways. So they report, but then they're not judged or shamed. We just thank you and move on. We focus a lot on medical support and treatment because our clients come in with often complex medical needs. We focus on getting them a family doctor or getting them, we have a registered nurse who's a part of our outreach team, and we make sure that they are, getting infections checked out, getting other health issues that may come up addressed as necessary. We also have everyone is put on an individual treatment plan, and we make sure that treatment plan is sort of ongoing and revised. We have peer support. We have recreational therapy. We have randomized urine screens and they're required once a week. The court engages in sanctions and incentives to encourage participation, and we are well connected to various community agencies as appropriate. So how do you graduate? How do you successfully complete our program? So to graduate or successfully complete, you have to be in the program for at least 12 months. You have to have at least 3 months of no use or significant reduction. And you have to have stable housing. You have to be working or in school or volunteering. You have to have no new charges in the last 3 months, no new convictions. And there has to be a recommendation from your therapist or the treatment team that you're ready to graduate. Our participants complete a changes of choice intervention through our probation services. And then once the recommendation is made, we have a lovely graduation ceremony and they graduate from the program. And we consider that the first phase. The second phase is so after graduation, our clients are sentenced on their charges to a non-custodial sentence, and they're given a period of probation. Once that probation is complete, then we consider the second phase of the program to be complete. But graduation is not necessarily our gold standard. We really also consider there's many aspects of program goals. So we're focusing on quality of life in terms of their housing, their health, stabilization, their connection both to us and the community, their reduced criminal recidivism, if they're reducing their use or if their use is safer than it was before, that is one of our goals, or recovery as they've defined it for themselves. We think about if they're engaged in pro-social activities or connections. Do they have a sense of hope? And is there reduced harm to themselves and also to the community? So, as I mentioned, we have been around for a long time. We're 25 years now. The program has existed. We were the first in Canada. We started in 1998. At that time, there were a number, in the 90s, there were a number of US drug treatment courts popping up in response to the mandatory minimum sentences that were entering into legislation there. And we were the first in Canada. At that time, primarily the substance use was cocaine and crack, with a few using heroin. We were abstinence focused, compliance focused, and the understanding of gender, trauma, brain injury, opiate treatments, social determinants of health, harm reduction was less developed than it is now. Clients were always high risk and high needs, although I'll talk soon about how the landscape has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. But the staff education and cross-training was always a high priority with our team, and there was always a pathway to evolve and to keep learning and to adapt to new research as it came out. So I have a bit of before and after. So I would say before we were not as highly trauma-informed, had some tradition of tough love, and we've moved away now to changing our language around offenders. We don't say clean or dirty screens. We focus on education and training, knowledge exchange. We consider ourselves a therapeutic court rather than a problem-solving court. And historically, we were very, considered someone's success to be determined on whether or not they were using. And now we're moving towards a more holistic focus. And I mentioned some of the ways that we measure that. On their bail, historically, there was a condition that they were not to use drugs. We've just taken that out. Historically, alcohol and cannabis were monitored. It is something that comes up in their screen, but they're not required to report that in court, their cannabis or their alcohol use. Historically, most of our clients were using cocaine or crack, and now it's almost entirely crystal meth or fentanyl. And in the past, psychiatry was difficult to access, and now we've created a partnership where we have very low barrier access to psychiatry. Again, addiction medicine was limited in the past, and now we have very low barrier access to addiction medicine. We have a nurse on staff, and we have a rapid access clinic to addiction medicine on our floor that operates every day. Historically, we were abstinent focused, and now we're very much harm reduction focused. We were also focused on sanctioning people who were not complying with the rules, and now we try to focus more on contingency management and incentives, a more balanced approach with court and treatment. We've increased the amount of time. Historically, it was 30 days to reverse their plea or to strike the pleas and go back into the regular system. We've increased that to 60 days, and there were binary rules in the past, either you missed it or you didn't. And now we have a bit more of a deeper understanding of substances, mental health, trauma, people's learning disabilities, and we've moved away from a standard program towards individualization. Historically, there was one path to graduation or success, and we've created a program that is increased flexibility, and we can define success a bit more based on the person's individual And this is a big part of that, is that our team has always been open to learning and training, and it's always been a really good partnership between our treatment providers and our core team. The other factor I think that I need to comment on in terms of what has shaped our evolution is the pretty significant change in the drug landscape over the last 5 to 10 years. And that has been a move away from crack and heroin to our primary substances of concern for our clients are crystal meth and fentanyl. And this is adding complexity and to the people's situations that we're working with, and a number of risks, things that make it much more complicated. So certainly this is well documented in the last few years. There's been an increase in the benzodiazepine content of street-based opiates. And this really complicates withdrawal management and opioid replacement therapies, and it dramatically increases overdose risk. We've seen an increase in hospitalizations for substance-induced psychosis, infections, and of course, overdose deaths. And for those who survive their overdoses, there's an increased risk of brain injury from those overdoses. And this is all coupled with the extreme housing crisis that we're facing in Toronto. And the context in Toronto is that this is not only sort of a lack of affordable housing, but it's made more extreme by a lack of access to shelter beds. So, which increases people's risk. They're using in more dangerous situations, and they're having more complex health issues, and it just changes the levels. So that's been a big part of our evolution. There's also an aspect of the pandemic, I think, that changed the way we practice a bit too. But the changing drug landscape has forced us into a changing. We've absolutely had to adapt the way that we practice. And I think the reality is that it's been 25 years. And so I would hope that in 25 years from now, we're going to look back and think about the way that the program has evolved, and with new research and new ideas, the key to survival is evolving, of course. And so in 25 years, perhaps someone will show us a presentation of how things have changed. And with that, we are redefining success. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Sarah Pichut, to talk about the new research that's happening in our program. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks, Laura. I'm going to try to hone how slowly you speak, because I tend to be pretty rapid with my words. So yeah, given everything that Laura said, and I think also a dream that our manager, Robin Cuff, has had for a long time, we decided to try to reevaluate DTC. So there's a national evaluation that's done every 5 years, but Toronto Drug Treatment Court has not had one in a while. And so what we did is we tried to choose, kind of started from the ground up. We chose 5 indicators that we think are indicative of success. And that includes some feedback from clients, and we're developing a brand new evaluation framework. I think a big piece of this is that when we're working kind of at ground level, frontline staff, we see these successes that may not be considered by the general public to be successes. Laura and I were brainstorming some of them yesterday, and we were saying, maybe 10 years ago, if a client had been hospitalized a few times, that may have been seen as like, oh, maybe that client is too unwell for our program, or, maybe they need something more intense. But when you're working with these people, Laura and I are more likely to say, wow, that's incredible. The client went to the hospital, they willingly sought treatment and went inpatient and, got on medication, and yeah, good for them. So these are the types of things that have really pushed us to want to redefine success. And as Laura mentioned, graduating the program, not using drugs again, that is a beautiful goal, but it's not realistic for everybody. And it's not the only way to be successful in drug treatment court. So phase 1, I actually did this as part of my MSW studies last year. And phase 1 was a chart review. You can switch the slide, Laura. Thanks. And so what we came up with was, you jumped one, sorry. No. Yep, there you go. We came up with 5 indicators of success. And so what we're looking at is changes in drug use, changes in criminal behavior, improvements in quality of life, DTC engagement, and hope. So I'll walk through how we're measuring these and a little bit more detail. So changes in drug use, of course, we're looking at a decrease in frequency of drug use. If somebody goes from using all day, every day around the clock to only using in the evenings or only using on weekends, that is an indicator of them getting better. If they're using less, or if they're using a substance that is less potent, you know, giving up IV crystal meth and smoking weed to us is a huge win. Getting safe supply and not buying fentanyl or opiates on the street, that is a huge win. So it is decreasing the potency and the severity of the drug. And also decreasing the severity or danger to route of administration. So if somebody stops injecting drugs and starts smoking, or you know, just is using less or using in safer ways, that is a total win in drug use. So how we measure this is we look at our client's self-report. Because they work with us over years, we develop very strong rapport with them, and they actually do report usually quite accurately what they use, how much they use. We also collect urine drug screens randomly. Clients are asked to leave 1 urine drug screen on a random day every week. And their self-report is, you know, supposed to match what's in their screen. We can look at the number of overdoses our clients have. We can look at hospitalizations for overdose. We can look at physical indicators, track marks, weight gain. You know, if we're working with a stimulant user, generally they're quite slim. And so when somebody puts on weight, you know, combined with the self-report of using less, that's a real indicator that they are making changes. And also utilizing harm reduction supplies. So if they do continue to use substances, whether it's smoking or injecting, if they're using clean paraphernalia, if they're using at a safe use site, that is also a huge win. And the second criteria, we're looking at changes in criminal behavior. So this includes a decrease in the frequency of charges, so how often they're picking up charges, how severe their charges are. If somebody's getting curfew breaches versus break and enters, that feels kind of like a element of success. If they're getting arrested less often, if they're spending less time in custody. And how we measure this, we have a wonderful paralegal and court team, as well as police liaisons who can get us reports, criminal records, synopses. And of course, our clients sometimes, as I mentioned, they have strong rapport with us. Sometimes they will self-report how much crime they're doing or how much they've been able to cut back. And the third criteria we're looking to measure success is changes in quality of life. So this includes a lot of the social determinants of health, whether or not a client is housed, whether or not a client has a family doctor, primary care provider, if they're on opiate replacement therapy or opioid agonist therapy, if a client has their mental health needs being assessed and supported. Sometimes that includes medication, sometimes that includes specific therapies or meeting with our psychiatrist. And what I've coined on the grid, which is this idea of clients feeling like they count in society. They have a lease, they have identification, they do their taxes, they have keys to an apartment or home. This idea of just like getting on the grid. And how we measure this is we can easily look at things like rental leases, if they're registered with a community health center or a care clinic, if they see our psychiatrist or a psychologist, if they're taking medication, if they have a relationship with their pharmacist, if they have access to vaccines, and access to specialists. A lot of our clients struggle with things like Hep C, HIV, foot care is huge, diabetes, that sort of thing. And as I mentioned before, on the grid. Oh yeah, having a phone is a big piece of that too. The fourth criteria we're looking at is DTC engagement. So that's looking at how their relationship is with our program. If they feel safe when they're here, if they're participating in individual therapy, group therapy, if they answer the door when we come visit them in the community, if they come to our leisure events or activities. We do special groups for holidays. You know, with the December holidays coming around, we have turkey dinners and gifts and games and things that we have planned, meals, mostly around meals. So if they attend that sort of stuff, you know, when they're coming to things that are kind of extra, not just the things that the court is mandating. You know, really what we're looking for is we're looking to see a shift from external reasons to be motivated. So, you know, they come into our program because they're motivated to not be in jail. And we want to see that shift where they're staying in our program because they're motivated to do well, to change their lives, to have more control over their life and their use. And how we measure this, you know, we're all computerized here at CAMH, so we can see the number of times a client has visited CAMH. We can see their group attendance. We keep track of telephone calls, text messages, and of course, self-report, which I'll get to the results of the OPOC survey in a minute. And the fifth indicator is we're looking at hope. And so we want to see that our clients have shifted, as I mentioned, from coming here because the court kind of presents them with the option to come here. And we want to see that they're coming here because they actually have some hope and desire to change their life. We also want to see that they understand that they have pathways to obtain those desires and goals, and that they believe that they can do it and act toward it. When a client believes that they have the capacity to be successful in DTC, that's huge. That's a huge indicator of success. And how we measure this is we actually have access to the Adult Hope Scale, which is a standardized tool that looks at a person's sense of hope. So not only if they have hope, but whether or not they believe they have the capacity to obtain their goals. And then I mentioned we're going to talk about the OPAC comments. So this is the Ontario Perception of Care survey that was done last year. The surveyors came around and spoke with our clients, and they completed questionnaires. And this was some of the stuff they said, which I think speaks to how connected they feel to us, how safe they feel here, and the fact that you can hear that a lot of them have a lot of hope for themselves. So that, you know, they feel the service is great, the staff is great, they've learned a lot. Some of them feel like they had ideas and we help them put those ideas into action. Transferable skills, I'm guessing that is because when a client, you know, is far along in their DTC involvement, we do urge them to be working, volunteering, or in school. And honestly, just a safe place. Like the number of our clients who put us down for as their emergency contacts, or they call us when they're having a family crisis. These things all speak to how connected and how safe they feel with us. So I mentioned the success indicators came about as part of my Master's of Social Work Studies, which I completed earlier this year. And so what we decided to do for the program evaluation was take a subset of clients. So we looked at the 15 clients who had joined our program in the 14 months before the pandemic. The reason we chose this is, I mean, they were a convenient group to study, but they also had a typical process through the DTC program, or at least typical into the DTC program. So they started when our program was fully running. We did shut down for a period of time in the pandemic. We never closed our doors, but court stopped, groups stopped, and we had clients coming by like on a drop-in basis, you know, masked and 6 feet away, and face shields and sometimes full protective equipment. So we've always been open to our clients, but nothing was mandated. Urine screens weren't mandated. It was just a really different time for about the first 6 to 8 months of the pandemic. So that's why we took the sample size of the people who had entered before the pandemic. So they had some semblance of what a typical DTC engagement application process is. And so, yeah, so there was 15 participants in this sample, and the demographic information, 14 out of 15 identifies male, 1 female. The age range was 29 to 67 years old, with the median age being 46. And racially, they broke down to 60% identified as white, 13% Black, 13% Asian, 7% Indigenous, and 7% East Indian. Interestingly enough, at the time of assessment, 60% identified as white, but actually 2 people, which is 23%, came forward afterwards and explained that they did have Indigenous roots and they just weren't connected to their indigeneity at all. And so that was also, and I also think there's more complex layers to why people don't always identify, but that's the breakdown of our clients. 80% identified as heterosexual, while 20% identified as bisexual. I do think this is probably a pretty accurate snapshot of who we serve. And regarding substance use, 40% of our clients reported being stimulant users, and 60% identified as being both stimulant and opioid users. This is just indicative of these 15 people. I don't necessarily know if this speaks to our whole program, but nobody said that they were solely opioid users. And the age range from when clients reported having problematic substance use ranged from as early as 7 years old up until 35 years old, with the median age being 18. So that early adulthood is when their substance use really took off. Of the 60% of the clients that reported using opioids, all of them met the criteria for opioid use disorder in the DSM, which means they had a high dependence on opiates. And yet only 2 clients, which is 22% of the clients, were on opiate replacement therapy. So that means 2 of our clients came to us from custody saying that they were on methadone or Suboxone or Sublocade, and both of those clients said that they were not on the right dose. It was not holding them. They were still experiencing withdrawal. They still felt like they had to use opioids to keep themselves from being sick. And so some updates regarding addiction medicine. At the time of doing this evaluation from earlier this year, 100% of our opioid users are stable on opiate replacement therapy or opiate agonist therapy. That felt like a huge win. And as Laura mentioned, we do have a rapid assessment clinic, an addiction medicine clinic on our floor, and that definitely has been helpful for us and for getting our clients connected. In terms of housing, when our clients were first assessed, which I mentioned was pre-COVID, so January to February 2019 to 2020, only 2 people in our sample of 15 were housed. And one of those 2 became homeless very shortly after coming to our clinic, coming to our program. 4 out of the 15 said that they were precariously housed. They were couch surfing. They were sleeping on somebody's sofa, not a bedroom, not a lease, not paying rent. And 60%, 9 out of 15 of our clients came to our program absolutely homeless. So they were sleeping outside or they were trying to access shelters. So as you can imagine, housing becomes a huge priority in the beginning. But at the time of pulling this information earlier this year, 100% of our participants were housed. 2 of the 15 were in transitional housing, so they had 11-month leases. And even an update from that now, one is signing a permanent lease this week, actually. So we've had a lot of success with having housing partnerships in the community and housing our clients. Some of the challenges with doing this type of research. So there's a lot of challenges, and I hit a lot of roadblocks trying to do this research as a non-researcher. So an example is I was looking at these standardized assessment tools that we do with our clients when they first come to us. And they do these standardized questionnaires such as the BASIS 32 and the ASI. But the problem with them is they're showing inaccurate results because our clients weren't reporting accurately, and also because there's bias in these tools. So for example, the BASIS 32 asks how much difficulty you've had in different areas of your life over the last week. And the default, if it doesn't apply to you, is to put no difficulty. So sure, if our clients are coming to us straight from custody, yeah, they don't have any difficulty with doing their laundry and housework because they don't have any. They don't have difficulty preparing meals because that's done for them. They don't have difficulty socializing because they have no choice but to be around other people. They might not have any difficulty taking their medication because there's a pharmacy that's providing their medication to them daily. So these sorts of things they don't end up translating. The other thing that's happening is our clients, they don't know us that well and they don't know what to say, and they're trying to they're trying to make us happy so that we let them into the program, and they're nervous about saying the wrong thing. So a lot of them will play their symptoms down. And then, if we were to re-administer, for example, a BASIS 32, 6 months in, 12 months in, once a client has a strong rapport with us, they're going to answer these more accurately and honestly, which is going to give the appearance that our clients are doing worse. it's going to give the appearance that they're now struggling with housework and medications and their mental health, when really they've just increased their awareness and increased their safety and rapport with us. So that was one thing. So what I ended up doing is manually combing through charts, which is excruciating and time consuming. As I mentioned before, we document every interaction with clients. So there are hundreds, sometimes thousands of notes that I'm trying to comb through manually. Other challenges is looking at urine drug screens to indicate use or decreased use has its limitations. So for example, crystal methamphetamine stays in the system for usually more than a week. And so if a client uses 1 out of 7 days a week or 7 out of 7 days a week, their urine drug screen is going to show positive. So it's difficult to measure a decrease in use through urine drug screens. Now we can request the levels of drugs in somebody's urine. It feels a little bit like playing a detective. It's also costly. Another challenge is when we're looking at the change in criminal activity. As Laura mentioned, they get a bail that has some restrictions on it. So one example is they have a curfew when they come into our program. And so they may pick up a bunch of failed to comply charges because they don't respect the curfew, they're out at night. And even if they're not doing criminal activity, they could end up picking up more charges because of our program and the restrictions. Keeping up with the changes to the sample is difficult. People have been known to switch, add, or minus different drugs of concern. They move a lot, they change their phone numbers. They have a phone, they don't have a phone. So it's not always simple to say whether or not they have a phone, because they might one month and not the next month. The other challenge is client deaths. This sample of 15, one person actually passed away in the spring of this year. Laura and I were also talking yesterday that our deaths have drastically increased in the last couple of years. Drastically, like a rough calculation was we'd gone from losing about 1% of clients to I think it was up to 7% of clients. The other thing that's changed is we used to have our therapeutic court 2 days a week. We now have therapeutic court 1 day a week. That was a change that happened right around the time that COVID happened. And so that change skews our attendance data. But we will keep going. So the plan now is the data that I have gathered is going to our research department. They are now sort of taking over and going to continue with the success indicators we've identified and do a full DTC evaluation that will consider these different indicators we've identified. So that is it. I haven't been looking in the chat. I don't know, Valerie, if you...
No, I'm going to check now.
Okay.
I have no open questions. That was in the Q&A and now in the chat. And no, there's not. So if anybody has any questions or any comments, they can enter. Best to enter them in the Q&A section. And or if you have any final comments that you want to make on your program, we still have about 10 minutes left. Do you have any wrap-up comments that you want to make? Hopefully, all of our drug treatment courses will keep going for years to come. We have one in. Yeah, the chat is disabled, and that said people are asked to put the questions in the Q&A, and I think that was a standard throughout. Think that was it.
Oh, sorry, I see the comment from Dan. I love that ARF helped you. That's amazing.
So do you see that?
I can see Megan's question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So we do some topics that, I mean, often we kind of fly by the seat of our pants and do whatever topic comes up or clients seem to be struggling. We talk about different things in early recovery versus like in our prep group versus our maintenance group, depending on how far clients are. But we do everything from introduction to mental health, introduction to addiction, stages of change, motivation, boundaries, goal setting, cognitive behavior type like thinking traps and unhelpful ways of thinking, self-care, self-compassion, what is harm reduction, what is happiness, music therapy. We have a peer support worker who does groups. We have a probation officer that does groups with clients who are getting close to graduating the program. We talk about the basics of like what is trauma therapy. I don't know, Laura, anything you want to add?
Yeah, all of those. Grief.
Yeah, grief's
a big one. Using more safely. I think the point is that we work with our clients for like years. So to complete the program successfully, it's at least a year, but most people take so much longer. So it's not uncommon for us to work with our clients for 3, 4, 5 years or more. Yeah. And so there's repeat in groups, but we can't follow a typical 12-week cycle. We take group content from standardized programming and we adapt it for I usually do like an adapted CBT group, shortening it and making the information more accessible for our clients who may have learning disabilities or brain injury or are actively using, are coming in having recently used crystal or fentanyl, and so we're making that information really accessible to them.
Can you see the other two? Do you need me to read them out? What role does probation play in the determination of graduation criteria as opposed to the after graduation phase?
Okay, so I think you mean in terms of graduation from the phase 1. So the probation, we have an active probation officer in our program who takes on any clients who are already on probation when they come into the program. So for example, maybe they're already on a 2-year probation from some of their charges that they got before they came into the program, and they'll typically transfer their probation to our probation officer so they don't have conflicting probation reporting requirements. And so that probation officer will work with those people, but they also just work with everyone who's not on probation, doing risk assessments for us. They do probation has a measure they use called the LSI to do a risk assessment. And then after graduation, when they're all on probation, they become more involved with the probation officer. So at that point, they're reporting to their probation officer every month, and the probation officer, their only requirement as on their probation order once they graduate from program is to follow counseling as directed by their probation officer and to appear in drug treatment court once a month. So the probation officer at that point in the phase 2 is their sort of primary director of what their obligations are at that point. And that person connects a lot with us, the treatment team at CAMH, who's been working with them for whatever period of time in terms of what we think might be helpful for them as well.
We have 2 more. I didn't realize that they couldn't seem, so I'll read them out loud. Just curious, because you mentioned the minimum is 12 months, but often people are in the program for a lot longer. Out of the 15 of the sample size that entered the program in January 2019 to February 2020, how many are still in stage 1 of the program and how many have graduated or left for other reasons?
I can answer this. 1 has passed away. 2, 3 have exited. 1 exited because he was he'd completed kind of all he wanted to complete. He didn't graduate, but he did exit successfully. 2 are on pause because they picked up charges that are ineligible for DTC, and 4 graduated.
So the next is, how do you support clients after graduation and once they are no longer officially in drug treatment court?
They're still welcome to come to everything. So when they're in the phase 2 or they're on probation, it's usually between 6 and 18 months. They still attend court once a month during that time, and they're welcome to come to any of our groups. And of course, invited to special events, the holiday lunches and things like that. Am I missing anything, Laura? I mean,
well, beyond that, even people who don't success. One thing I regret maybe not covering is, so there's 2 parts. I'll answer the question, then I want to cover something else, which is, so people who, even after that phase 2 of the graduation, we do tend to see people for longer than that. We don't have a limit on how long they can access our services. So they come to see us. Maybe they come to groups, or maybe they come when there's a crisis, or maybe they come just to kind of keep things on track. They'll just check in with either a peer support worker or their original therapist, or who's ever taken over if it's been years since that they've been in the program. And so, or they just sort of connect with the team sometimes here and there. It really depends. One thing I think I might track back to is that people who don't successfully complete the program, there are some people who don't make it all the way to graduation and just go to sentencing, and at that point they do consider at sentencing their participation in the program, which certainly impacts their sentencing in a favorable way. And we often see people who did not successfully complete the program still continue to engage in our services, even though they're no longer required to. Or they may use our services sort of as they need them. If there's a housing crisis, or if there's a medical issue, or there's something that happens, they'll just come back and say like, can you help me with this? And the answer is always yes.
We have 2 more. The next is, when is the programming going back to 2 days a week?
Oh, Brian, I love this question. We don't know. We're advocating for it. We have a lot of reasons why we'd like to bring court back to 2 days a week. And so we're advocating strongly.
Yeah, it's certainly it's detrimental to only have it once a week, because it can create challenges. If someone is arrested, they may end up spending more time in custody than they would otherwise, and that's obviously a concern. And yeah.
And to round out the last one we have, because we're running short of time too, is, I may have missed this at the beginning of the presentation. I think the person did. Is the Toronto program abstinent-based still, or harm reduction? And then it says, oh, sorry if this was covered, and it was. So.
Oh no, I welcome it. We are not abstinence-based. We are absolutely harm reduction focused, and it's at the center of what we're doing. So, and it's a really important point. So I'm like very happy to repeat it.
It is, as we're in St. John's, we're a harm reduction court too, and I find it it hasn't been challenging to get people on board, but people are much more receptive to it than they were to abstinent based only, and how we would respond to that. So if there are no more further questions, I'd like to thank Laura and Sarah on behalf of the Association of Justice and Treatment Professionals for their programming, for their presentation today. And I know at some point the programs are going to be available, the recordings. I just don't know when, and then they'll either send out a link for them on the website, or they'll be placed on YouTube. So for everybody else, the next scheduled session is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm on Newfoundland time, and I have a really hard time converting it, so I'll go to the EST time. And it's treatment strategies for individuals at high risk of committing a violent sexual offense, guiding good choices. So with that, I'll end the session and wish everybody a happy holiday season and have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks very much.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.